Well, here we are, kicking off another half-hour episode of the soap opera that we like to call Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. We're having a conversation. This is not scripted in any way. It is not intended to alter anything other than mindset and what might be important for you to think about. Empowerment. That's really what we're up to here. Empowerment is actions that can be taken by people who possess the skill, they possess the desire, and they possess a desired outcome. That by doing so, they're able to take action when action is difficult to take. Go from being stuck to being in effective action. And we have a caller on at this moment, and I don't recognize the phone number.
You don't, huh? Hi, it's Vanessa.
Hey, there it is. It's a different number. It's 1203. Welcome aboard. This whole thing just got a lot better.
No, okay. So it's not 8675309.
No, it's not. But that's because that's Jenny's number.
That's right.
Tell you what, how would you like to be Tommy Two-Tone and those guys and be set for life off of one single song? They put an album out, but I would defy you to name another one that they did.
No, I wouldn't. No, I wasn't a big fan of that.
No
music.
But I mean, you stop and think about where we'll get you up to speed very quickly, Vanessa. We're talking about language. We're talking about linguistics, and we were just distinguishing the three distinct legs of language. One being structural, which is object to object. My relationship to this chair that I'm sitting on, we have an understood contract that I will sit on this chair and it will keep me from falling to the floor. And then we have the what I like to call immediate or nonverbal, when you use the facial features or you use gestures and that sort of thing to communicate. And then the last one, the one that is the most easy of the three most people feel to master. However, it's the one that is the easiest to disagree over something that is conceptually 100% understood in both directions, just using different words. So that's why we have, I don't know how many names for a chair we would have around the world in all the dialects and all the different languages. I think there's upwards of 12,000 different dialects around, maybe even more than that, because families have their own words for certain things. There are some things at our household that my wife and I can talk about, and the other people in the room who hear the conversation have no idea what we're talking about, and it just sounds odd to them. Anybody else have little names that you come up with, or things that were related to a memorable experience?
That's a good question. I get to say that pets and people we love tend to get nicknames.
Yes.
Pretty easily.
So here's an interesting thing. The Oxford Dictionary has 273,000 headwords. 171,476 of them are in current use. Now, I don't know how they get that precise with the words. 47,000, it's on the internet and in Google, so it has to be true, right? 47,156 being obsolete words. And why would you bother having words in the dictionary that are obsolete? Around 9,500 derivative words are included as sub-entries. So I would, for the longest time, my understanding of how a word got put into the dictionary was it had to be requested. Universities and that sort of thing were constantly putting new words as a request into Webster. And now all the slang words that we used to work, when I was going to school, Vanessa, you're a lot younger than I am, but the word ain't was not a dictionary word. Well, it is now, okay? And thousands of other words as well. And just to kind of like put a real fine tooth on this whole representational language thing, the French, and this is cool because I don't know when they created the Society for Pureness of Language, etc., but when I was in high school, they had 40-some thousand words in their dictionary, and they would not allow any other words to be put into this so-called, the masterwork of their language. Who even knows at this point whether they've been able to do anything with that at all, because people don't have to use a dictionary much anymore. All right, so that's a lot of narration to get you caught up to speed. Vanessa, are you ready to roll?
Yeah, thank you for bringing me up to speed. Nice to be with you guys again.
So our question now is, we were playing with the word but. You know how in a sentence the word but invalidates everything that comes before it, or it creates a position that may not necessarily be there or accurate. And Ken was relating the word and as a kind of a good jumping off point, where you could be stating what you think you've heard, or stating a position, or stating a fact, and then what comes after that is another way of looking at it, or related information.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So.
Well, I think that's. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, when you say I think, I want to hear what comes after that.
So I think that's a great topic. Of course, being a lover of words and being someone who works with words all the time, as a marketing copywriter and a freelance writer, words are the tool. And but you're talking about the word but. But I agree with what Ken said too. Yeah, and is I think we talked about this in previous podcasts. And is definitely a great connector word. It's a word that, and I'll contrast this with but it's a word that will connect, keep the conversation going. It's, I don't know if you would call it a positive word, but it's a word that continues the conversation. Valid and in a very subtle way, I think it validates, or even subliminal, it validates what the other person has just said, even if the person that's about to speak now has a rebuttal, or disagrees with what this person said.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always heard that it's good to say, yes, I agree with you, and instead of I agree with you, but, because the magical way that the other word but will be used is it can put someone on the defensive, because right away it's like and you talk about words being visceral. You talk about things being visceral a lot, Bill. So I feel like words in many cases can be considered visceral as well. And I hope I'm not getting off topic, but just processing what you said. So if and is visceral in a way, is like people all of a sudden can feel like, once they've stated their point and the other person is now speaking up, they can feel like, okay, there's a connector. There's something else that someone wants to add, but meanwhile they validated what I said. And then, but on the flip side would be like, there's a barricade, and now this person might subliminally start sort of getting into a defensive mode without realizing. So words are very, very powerful, and those two words are no exception. They're such simple words, 3 letters each, but they can be very powerful in our everyday conversation.
Yes.
And I think that's all I'll say for now.
Good for you. Well, you basically recreated what we took a half hour to say just before starting this one up. So here's the thing. We also were discussing about the words being, they are tools. They are tools that create worlds. I mean, they, in every single moment, what comes out of your mouth is the world that you are currently living in. And it's no more, that's no more fancy than when you put your foot on the gas pedal and the car is turned on and you have gas, in the gas tank. Your expectation is that that's going to make the car go forward, or at least race the engine. And the words have the same utility. So knowing and being very adept with language makes it. I mean, people get paid a lot of money, just to create a world for someone for an hour or so, public speaking, or they get paid a lot of money to ask questions and delve into some language that people may not know that they possess. So part of what we were talking about too, you've done some technical writing as well, haven't you, Vanessa?
Technical writing, I wouldn't say so, no.
No, okay.
Not really, no.
Policies, procedures, that sort of thing. Well, the early on in the whole formalization of manufacturing, starting in the 1970s, taking the Deming approach of statistical quality control and numeric statistics and all that good stuff, the Six Sigma approach that he went to Japan and whipped on them in the 50s and 60s and made them the best manufacturing country on the planet. Then he had to come back to the United States and say, well, why did their cars break down less? The Fords and the Chevys and all the rest of those were, we're close enough, And so the whole idea of a procedural or a policy manual is a book that needs to be updated when it needs to be updated. And how you know that it's outlived its usefulness is there are human beings engaged with the practices that are talked about and are prescribed and described in these manuals. So we were also kind of looking at using the manufacturing model when companies picked up all of their machinery and moved it to China and brought a few people that they thought were so-called key employees that could actually help the startup on these things. They had to go through the same learning curve that they went with any new employee, but the whole plant had to learn at the same time. And I know my own experience, Rogers Corporation in South Wyndham, they moved to China around 1992, I want to say. And there were some people that I used to work with that went over there. And they said, these Chinese people are the dumbest people on the planet for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, they're absolutely freaking brilliant. They're so committed to learning. They do nothing but ask questions. And what about this? And what about that? And then what happens, So all of a sudden it clicks in for them, but not after 3 or 4 months. We're talking after 2 weeks. They have been trained how to be trained. They get rewarded based on their ability to interact with physical things and to master them quickly, which is, I think, we see that with and I'm not generally not a generalist, but if you think about what Chinese people who come to America are known for, they're known to want to do work before they do anything else. Most of the stereotypical, like what happens here? They go to Harvard, and every last one of them graduates in the top, not 10%, but the top 1% of their class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do they do this? Everything else waits until they've mastered, the subjects. So now, a lot of us just kind of like talk to people. And I don't know about you. You guys are both avid readers. The last time I actually read a printed book, we're talking years ago. I mean, I listened to Audible taped books, that sort of thing, which means, I'm missing out on the whole visual opportunity that there is in terms of the experience of reading. I just noticed
Yeah, that's a good point that you made, and it's interesting that you said that reading can be a visual experience. But certainly, yeah, because I mean, how do we, when we're children, how do we learn to read in the first place? We're actually recognizing the shapes of the letters.
Yeah.
So then, as our reading capacity expands, the more we read, then we're picking up on the nuances of language. And then if we're reading fiction books, like I'm a copywriter, and one of the things that I struggled with is telling a really good story. And copywriters are meant to, we do sales writing, so we're meant to write persuasively, and so really understanding human psychology and thinking about what the reader's thinking as they're reading. And so the best way to get anyone to to tap into someone's emotions is to tell them a story. And so I've always been more of a nonfiction reader, and because I wanted to learn, or realized even for my own profession, that I needed to be able to learn how to tell a better story, I've surrendered, if you will, to getting back into reading fiction books and watching movies, and just trying to understand how a movie plot is laid out. There's a formula behind it all, and there's a formula behind novels or even short stories. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and end, but then it's how the story is told and what details are used and what details are left out. And so that's one of the things you pick up as a reader as well. Not to mention if you're reading something like fiction, going back to what you were saying, Bill, about it being a visual experience. I don't know actually if this is what you were thinking about when you said this, but when we're reading something like fiction, it's like we have a movie. We're being dictated how to imagine. The rest is left up to our imagination, but we're based on the words and the emotions that are used and the characters that are portrayed to us. We're filling in the rest of the blanks in our mind, but so the words then become visual. I don't know if that's what you were referring to, but that's sort of where my train of thought.
No, I love what you're saying, and the whole notion of hearing something that's the language being spoken out loud. I don't know about you, but I don't listen to you speaking to me in terms of how the words are spelled.
Right.
So there's a completely different experiential translation, it seems to me, between visually reading something that has between 1 and what is it, 26, 27 letters, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, words like that, and to say them as opposed to visually, taking them on board. When I read, sometimes I'll go back and reread a sentence 2 or 3 times. Quite different than listening to it on an audible tape. Once it's gone by, there's no rewind back to the beginning of the sentence. You have to physically stop the thing, move that little pointer back until, oh, now what was that? But I usually hear and take on board, in terms of being satisfied with my understanding, better when I'm listening to the spoken word than when I'm actually reading something. I don't know how it is for you, but have you ever, if you think about it, is there a distinction in your world as well, or am I just kind of like a different breed of cat over here?
It's funny, because I read a lot, and it's my morning reading, which is always something kind of educational, transformational type stuff.
Yep.
Is always a physical book, like always, and then my reading during the day, whatever I'm doing, might be on a tablet, or Audible. I do a lot of audiobooks as well, so that I can kind of be moving around, walking, whatever. And then in the evening, I always read fiction. My lane, I love sci-fi fantasy, so I gravitate towards that. But it's funny, as Vanessa's talking, I think on some level, there's like a recognition of the balance of all of those things having value, and so I use all the mediums, you know. But I agree with you, Bill, to answer your question. I've definitely found I'm a auditory processor. That's my primary learning style.
Yep.
So, you know, audible books have always worked well for me. I think if someone's more visual, physically reading it is probably going to help them more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and for kinesthetic people, it's probably a combination of the two would be my guess.
Excellent. Vanessa, how about you?
Well, the other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking, Bill, is that when we're reading can help to increase our vocabulary. But then ever notice when you're reading something and it's like, say when you're in middle school and you're reading something that's at a high school or an adult level, and your whole reading experience is going to be you're going to stumble along the way if there's words that you might not understand. And one of the things, just to bring up another point, like the way that we read, if we are, well, even with audiobooks, but if we're like, there's another topic, but there's an effect that we get from reading physical books. There's been studies on it, physical books versus reading digital books. So, I've been reading a lot more now at night. So I have an Amazon Kindle, so that I have a light that'll come on in the book, and I can actually read it, you know, when it's dark in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So but I've never really liked reading on the Kindle. I've always gone for, you know, the physical book, and I do feel a difference of experience when I'm doing that. But the reason I'm mentioning this is, but the one good thing about reading anything digitally now is that, as far as I know, it's not an option on audiobooks. I could be wrong. Maybe Ken can help me there, but he prefers to read audiobooks or reads more audiobooks. I've read them before. I've never had this experience. But when you're reading a Kindle, if there's a word that you come across that you don't understand, you can right away hit that word, and the definition will pop up for you. And therefore, you know, you can ask that question, get the definition, and then be able to apply that in context to what you've just read. And then and then it serves the purpose of, oh, look, you've just learned a word. And also, you know, you can continue with the story. Your mind's not going to sit there stumped with, what did that word mean? So
there's another go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm done for now. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's another interesting dynamic. What's really kind of fun is when somebody uses a word verbally and mispronounces it. You know, what I mean by mispronounces is they pronounce it different than we've heard. Like, for instance, I was working with a man doing presentation, and he was talking about having their data come promised. And we were recording him. I mean, this guy's he's got a master's degree, and he's a brilliant business person. And so I said to him, I said, "You've never heard that word said out loud, have you?" He said, "No." He says, "I've read it many times." And he says, "It's not come promised." Well, you know, it's oftentimes pronounced compromised, you know? And I said, but that's a completely honorable way to, you know, there's a lot of substance in terms of your mind telling you that that's the way these words should be pronounced. You look at it, until you hear somebody actually say it out loud, it really does look like come promised.
Yes, it does look.
Yeah.
Well, they do say that English is one of the most difficult languages to master, if it's not your primary, or even if it is, because of things like that, the spellings being, you know, not seeming to really make sense to what we've.
The other thing that they say too is that between the Brits and Americans, these are, you know, countries divided by a common language, because and
What's that?
it basically means we don't ascribe the same meaning to a lot of different words. They pronounce them differently. They actually spell them differently. And until this generation, we had our own grammatical way to refer to groups or organizations, and they've taken those where we would say, Ford Motor Company has 30,000 employees. The Brits would say Ford Motor Company have 30,000 employees. So we were taught, and it's Kate Turabian. I mean, I don't know how many other wizards of grammar have sold the millions of books that she did, but there was no distinction that said because something was a group or would be plural that you would use an organization being a unit, being an entity of itself, but it's made up of many parts, and so therefore Ford will never have a has again with the way most people speak. So I actually am a little rebellious when I'm speaking. It's mostly to journalists, by the way. They like, we did it wrong for so many years, and it just makes so much more sense this way. Well, I don't know. Who's to say "come promised" is wrong? Damn it!
I know it's not technically wrong based on the way it's spelled. It's not.
Amen. So, with all of that said, if you have to give people rules, is there something else going on here? Are we using language as a potential tool of domination?
It's a tool. What's the intention behind it?
Mentality.
You know?
Now go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I'm typically suspicious of stuff like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, language is another tool that's used for, but I think that's a little hard to say because we have to communicate with each other. We're social creatures, and we have the ability to make sounds that become words that we all understand. Actually, I would argue that every species does, right? We just can't really understand it in between the species.
Sometimes you can, Vanessa.
Well,
you've got a dog, right?
I have a cat who's like a dog, yeah.
All right. So does that cat understand you when you speak to it?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It seems like it. And then they have different tones that they use to communicate things with us, and then it's just a matter of, well, this goes back to your point of how language is it's an organic process, how words come into our vernacular, right?
Yes. I've always loved the coining a word or coining a phrase, and I used it far longer. I didn't even know what that meant, but to stamp out a word like the way that a coin would be pressed, and now that's the shape and the size that it is. It's interesting. It's interesting from the standpoint that we would use a physical descriptor, of metal banging metal, to talk about creating a new piece of language. And boy, we've created thousands of them in my family and growing up. A lot of cultural language that goes on over here. Some of it is repeatable. So we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I want to know, in terms of what happened last week for Thanksgiving, what's going to be happening for Christmas, where are the greatest possibilities for lighting the candle in this time of, and actually today's the first day of Hanukkah, if I remember correctly. So we're heading into a very, very special season, actually in the middle of a special season, which I say starts right after Halloween when they start putting the Christmas decorations up. So lighting the candle, what does that look like between now and December 31st, when the whole world changes?
I think it's just an opportunity to, people are paying attention a little differently. There tends to be a little bit more of an attention on family and relationships and, spirituality and that kind of stuff. So it's really how mindful are you to tending those moments, when everybody's kind of in agreement to pay a little bit more attention than they normally would.
Yeah.
So, so that's always felt like the value to me is just, when someone's heart opens because of the season, that's an opportunity for there to be meaningful connection,
Interesting. Vanessa, how about you?
Well, can you be more specific, Bill?
I can be very specific.
Yeah.
So, for example, what we were talking about before with the word "but," if somebody says something and you say, well, I know you feel that way about that, but here comes the rest. That actually it has the same effect as killing that person and invalidating and dismissing not only what they said, but who they are. So we have the ability in a sentence to kill people off or grant being. Like, for instance, when you say and I'm not necessarily telling you that I agree with what you said. Like, for example, Ken, speaking with people is a very wonderful thing to do, and to light the candle in that way is really a very, very good way for you to do it. And in addition to that, what if we decided that we were going to ask people 3 questions before we said anything in terms of giving information from ourselves?
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.